First, I want to thank you all for coming to the Surescripts booth this morning here at HIMSS 2015. My name is Joe Delisle. I'm on the bottom of the screen there. I'm the business manager for Complete EPA, that's Surescripts' electronic prior authorization product. With me today are Luke Forster-Broughton, one of the product managers working on Complete EPA at Surescripts, and also we're pleased to announce Neil Simon, who's the Chief Operating Officer for Aprima Medical Software, one of the nation's leading EHRs, and we're also very proud to say one of the early adopters for Complete EPA. So we're here to talk about electronic prior authorization and prior authorization in general and the burden it places on the healthcare system. Prior authorization is instituted originally to ensure patients are on the appropriate medications that were cost effective, so essentially as a cost-saving mechanism. But that cost-saving mechanism comes at a pretty high cost for the PBMs, who are processing tens of millions of prior authorization requests every year, for the pharmacists, who are really the front line in prior authorization. They're the first point of contact. And then, of course, for physicians who are processing all these prior authorizations themselves, and at the end of the line for the patients. So what does it mean for physicians? So physicians spend more time dealing with prior authorizations than they do with any other interaction with their patients' health plans. What that means is about 8 hours per week per physician is spent on prior authorization. That adds up to about $14,000 on average per physician per year. In fact, it's such a problem that many practices have dedicated staff who do nothing but process prior authorizations. Now, with that, 9 out of 10 physicians are frustrated with the process as it exists today. And what is the process as it exists today? The prior authorization process really starts today when the patient goes to the pharmacy and the pharmacist has to tell them that they can't pick up their medication that their doctor prescribed. So this leaves the patient feeling frustrated, angry, and most of all, leaves them without their medication. So at this point, the pharmacist turns around and notifies the doctor that a prior authorization is required. And this is done either via phone call or fax. When the doctor finds out, he or his staff will initiate a prior authorization with the patient's health plan or PBM. And at this point, the process is a series of phone calls or faxes or visiting a portal. And all of this takes time out of the provider's day that could be spent working with their patients, helping them to get better. So that process, that prior authorization process today, the phone calls, the faxes, it takes a lot of time. And so much time that 2/3 of patients, a little bit more than 2/3 of patients, whose medications require a prior authorization aren't able to pick up their medication for 2 or more days. So it's a big burden, it's an administrative headache for physicians, and it impacts patient care. So with that said, a number of surveys have shown that electronic prior authorization is the number one e-prescribing capability that physicians want. So Surescripts did a number of surveys, the American Medical Association did surveys, and the NCPDP did surveys, and they all showed, as when it comes to e-prescribing, physicians want electronic prior authorization. Some way to take that administrative burden, take it away, and put it within their EHR. So Surescripts spent the last couple of years working on electronic prior authorization. We were involved with an EPA pilot with CVS Caremark, and performed a number of interviews and surveys over the last couple of years trying to determine what part of the prior authorization process physicians wanted fixed. So throughout those interviews and those surveys, we identified a number of key features and put them within our Complete EPA, our electronic prior authorization product. And really what the gist of it was, they wanted it to be an automated process. A lot of this information that is required to be on a prior authorization form is already within the EHR. They wanted it to be integrated within their EHR, and they didn't want to wait for 2 or 3 days for a fax response from the patient's health plan. So with that in mind, I'll take you through a number of the features and functionalities of Complete EPA as it exists today. And the first one is truly automated prior authorizations. And what this means is we support automated communication, electronic communication between the physician through their EHR, like Aprima, and the patient's health plan. And we're able to do that because of our unique place in the e-prescribing workflow. So Surescripts is already providing all the data necessary for electronic prior authorization to run really, really well, really efficiently and automatically. And that is mainly the eligibility data that we send to the EHR prior to a patient encounter. And that eligibility data contains information on who the patient has coverage with, and mainly who their pharmacy benefit manager is. So Surescripts, because we have that data already and have access to it, we're able to automate the process from the physician's EHR through to the patient's health plan. So another thing that the users who were processing prior authorizations today wanted was for the work to be within their EHR. They're in their EHRs all day. They don't want to have to leave the EHR to process a prior authorization. Again, like we said, all that information is already in the EHR. So today's process of phone calls and faxes with electronic prior authorization can be largely eliminated because all that information that is in the EHR can be automatically sent to the patient's PBM or health plan. So it essentially eliminates the need for the users to make a phone call to the health plan or fill out a long 2 or 3 page prior authorization form, or even go to one of the many prior authorization portals that the health plans and the PBMs may run. Another really great feature of Complete EPA is delivering the right questions for the right patient every single time. And this is really a function of connectivity. So there's 2 really great time-saving features that this particular slide entails, and it's all comes down to connectivity. Connectivity on the EHR side and connectivity on the health plan side. So on the EHR side, we're tightly integrated into our EHR partners' platforms, and what that allows us to do is take the demographic information. And I don't know if you've ever seen a prior authorization form, but the first page, about half or a third of that first page is just filled with demographic information. So who's the provider, who's the patient, and what medication are you prescribing? And all this information is already in the EHR system. So what Complete EPA allows the EHR to do is to send all that information electronically at the touch of a single button to the patient's health plan. This eliminates the need to fill in that entire top half of the prior authorization form. Now, the back end is where the right prior authorization questions every time really comes in. And because we're connected into the nation's largest PBMs and health plans, we're able to deliver the right question set for the right patient, for that patient's plan, and the medication that's being prescribed every single time. And the way it works is really kind of neat. So that initial transaction where we're extracting all that information from the EHR gets sent automatically into the health plan or the PBM's back-end system. And what happens there is what we like to call a little mini real-time benefits check. And it's looking up that patient's health plan and the medication that's being prescribed and checking to see if a prior authorization is really required. And if no prior authorization is required, that's great. The health plan will send back a note through the EHR saying no prior authorizations required, at which point the physician can then complete the prescription, send it off to the pharmacy, and the patient can go pick up their medication. If a prior authorization is required, the health plan is going to look in their back-end engine and match that patient's plan and the medication up with a question set that's specific to that patient's individual situation, and deliver that question set through Complete EPA into the doctor's EHR. So no more guessing where the patient has coverage. Surescripts takes care of all that automatically. No more guessing which form they should actually fill out because the PBM or the health plan is supplying that in real time automatically. And again, this last bullet here, we spent the last couple of years trying to create the largest network for electronic prior authorization. And when we set about doing that, we really wanted to create the best user experience for physicians through their EHRs. And what that means is connectivity. Connectivity into the EHR on the one side, but more important, in order to get those EHRs and doctors the best user experience is connectivity to the health plans and the PBMs on the back end. And that connectivity on the back end is really what drives electronic prior authorization and true electronic prior authorization. So it's the automatic routing of the messages to the correct health plan. It's the right question set every single time. And it's the real-time response within the EHR that's available only because of that connectivity on both ends. So today, our network consists of health plans and PBM representing about 225 million covered lives. So it's about 3/4 of the covered lives in the nation. And that's where we are today. It's not where we're going to be a year from now. More PBMs and more health plans are going to sign on based on regulatory requirements around electronic prior authorization, and even more when they see the cost savings that accrue to health plans and PBMs that are processing prior authorizations electronically. So again, here's just a recap of the key features of an electronic prior authorization solution, and what we found when we went out and talked to the physicians and the nurses and the office managers who are processing prior authorizations today. And we went over a bunch of them earlier, a couple slides ago, and really what it comes down to in each one of these is connectivity. It's real integration into the physician's EHR, and it's real connectivity for electronic prior authorization to the patient's health plan. And that allows for those PAs to be routed automatically. It allows for real-time health plan responses. So I think one of the key features here is that second row there, those real-time responses. So other solutions who aren't connected to health plans electronically will be faxing a prior authorization request on the back end, not sending it electronically. So what the response from the health plan is going to be is a fax to the physician's office. So complete EPA, all of our connections are electronic, and those responses are going to be delivered in real time to the EHR. And again, we talked about the forms being auto-populated. I mean, a whole top half of a page filled with information that the EHR already knows that can now be sent at the touch of a button. The relevant questions. So lots of questions are on a prior authorization form, but not all of them are relevant for every patient, for every plan, and for every medication. So based on the way a provider might answer a question, they may not have to answer all 15 questions on the form, but based on the answer to question 1, they might be able to skip questions 2, 3, and 4 and just skip to question 5. And that's, again, because of the connectivity on the back end to the health plan rules engine. And again, we talk more about integration in these last 2 rows, integration with the EHR and integration with the PBM. And that really drives the user experience that Complete EPA is offering to physicians through their EHRs. Okay, so where are we in the marketplace today? Where we sit on the EHR side is our EHR partners like Aprima here, representing about 330,000 physicians, have signed up for Complete EPA and are either live right now or in various stages of implementation with go-live dates between 2 weeks and the end of the year. And what those EHRs are signing on for is really that user experience that we talked about, the true electronic prior authorization, the automatic routing of prior authorization messages, the time savings afforded by getting the real-time responses within the EHR. And on the PBM side, as we mentioned before, we're available for about 225 million covered lives. And the PBMs that have signed on are able to get a high volume from these 330,000 docs of clean, standardized prior authorization messages. So with that, I will hand it over to Luke, who's going to talk about some implementation and workflow options.
Thank you, Joe. My name is Luke Forrester-Broughton. I'm a senior product analyst at Surescripts in the benefit and point of care messaging product. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about why we think the prospect of electronic workflow is really the ideal workflow for electronic prior authorization. So as you can see, in the prospective workflow, just like they do today for the prescribing, for e-prescribing, the prescriber is sending an eligibility message to the PBM prior to the patient coming into the doctor's office. And so before the patient even gets there, the doctor knows who the patient's health plan is, they know what their coverage is, and they know what their formulary information is that they need to check during the prescribing process. So based on that formulary information, they can prospectively identify the need for prior authorization before they even write the script. And so once they choose their drug, they can see that it needs a prior authorization, and they can immediately send a prior authorization request to the PBM and know at that point whether or not the drug truly needs a prior authorization. And if it doesn't, like Joe said, they can complete the script, send it to the pharmacy. And if it does need one, they can go ahead and fill out the prior authorization questions and know whether or not that PA is approved before they even send it. So as we mentioned earlier, the prior authorization form is pre-populated with that patient data. The doctor doesn't have to guess or try to anticipate what questions the PBM will ask. And so that whole process can be completed right before the patient even leaves the office, which is ideal. And then once the pharmacy gets the prescription, they will already know that it's been approved or denied because they'll have the information right there on the script. They don't have to keep sending the claim to the PBM and hope that it passes approval. And then when the patient gets to the pharmacy, they can pick up their script, and they would never know that there was a prior authorization that was needed or there were any issues getting their drug dispensed. And so the Surescripts Complete EPA solution is very flexible. So while we have identified the prospective EPA model as the ideal workflow, we can still handle some other workflows. So if in the retrospective model, the claim is rejected at the pharmacy, and the pharmacy contacts the prescriber to let them know that a PA is needed. And then at that point, the doctor can go into the EMR and fill out all the information for the PA and get that completed and let the pharmacy know that it's been completed, and then the claim will pass approval. And so the other option is if the medication is entered into the EMR, but it can't be sent electronically. We see that a lot with controlled substances. So even if the EMR itself isn't able to send controlled substances, they can still do an EPA and be able to get that approval or denial for the PA and then send the script non-electronically. So it's a very flexible solution. It can handle any of the workflows that the EMRs will run into. And so I want to talk about Complete EPA Accelerator. So the Accelerator is ready. So the Accelerator allows Surescripts to take a lot of the development burden away from prescriber vendors because these are very complicated messages. There are 8 message types that NCPDP has identified for the EPA transaction set, and it's a lot of heavy lifting on the side of prescriber vendors. And so Surescripts has developed what we call a Complete EPA Accelerator, and that allows us to take a lot of that burden off of the prescriber vendor and allow the HR to get to market a lot more quickly than they would otherwise be able to. So we've got a couple different flavors of the Accelerator web service. The first one is the Web Application API. And so what that is, it's a Surescripts hosted web app that's embedded into the EMR. And so it fully supports the NCPDP standard. It allows the provider to have a way to do the PA without the EMR having to do a lot of the development on their side. So they provide Surescripts with a little real estate that is invoked whenever the doctor needs to do a PA. And we can make sure that the questions get to the prescriber right within the prescribing workflow without the EMR having had to do a lot of development on their end. So it does offer a lower level of configurability than implementing EPA natively because Surescripts is responsible for the user interface. But using style sheets, the doctors or the EMR is able to make sure that it's a seamless transition and that the doctor would not know that they were calling a separate UI when they did a PA. And so with the Web Service API is something that we are just releasing and we're very excited about it. So this allows the EMR to have access to structured data from the Accelerator. And so rather than having to use the Surescripts UI, the doctor can pull different pieces of information right into their EMR wherever they feel like that information is best needed for the doctor's workflow. And so it combines the EPA work list that you would see in the web application API, and then you can decide what pieces of information you want to insert within the EMR and what pieces of information that you want to see within the Accelerator. And so we'll see some slides in a couple minutes that will show what this looks like. So the web app or service API is a lot quicker and cheaper for the EMR to be able to get that EPA solution into their system and get to market with that very quickly. So as we can see here, this slide just goes over the different flavors. So in the native implementation, the EMR would be responsible for implementing all 8 message types. And while this does allow a greater level of configurability for the EMR, it is very taxing because there are so many, it's such a complicated transaction set that they have to work on. So when they do certification with Surescripts, they have to certify on all 8 transaction types. And the average project duration is about 3 to 6 months. And the typical development effort is about 2 to 5 months. So it is because the complications or the the transactions are so complicated, it is a bit of a process for the EMR to handle. But as I said earlier, the level of configurability is very high because they're doing all that development work on their own. However, if we look at the complete EPA Accelerator, you can see that the prescriber vendor only has to implement to one transaction type, and Surescripts takes care of the rest. So the vendor has to implement to the PA initiation request, which, as Joe mentioned, is just that initial message to the PBM saying, does this drug need a PA? So Surescripts has already certified the application or the accelerator using all of our application certification requirements. And so the vendor doesn't have to worry about a lengthy certification process or a lengthy development process. So the typical project duration is about 2 to 4 months, and the development effort is about 1 to 4 months, depending on if you would like to use the web service or if you would like to add the web services API as well. So as I noted on this slide, the web service API is kind of the best of both worlds because you get the speed to market of the accelerator, but you also get the level of configurability that you would get if you developed the application natively. And so this is a little screenshot of how the accelerator actually looks within an EMR. So as you can see here, we've got we've got the work list. We've got the patient, George Jetson. You can see that we've got a question there. And then based on how the doctor answers this question, they'll know the accelerator will take them to the right question based on what they've answered on this question. So you can see the patient, the question, and then the doctor has the option to save if he or she wants to come back to the EPA and finish it later. So based on the way that the doctor answered question 1, you can see we go to question 3, and then we have a nice status bar to indicate how far into the EPA that doctor is. So by answering question 1, they're now 33%. And then based on how they answer the second question, they'll eventually get a PA approval, and you can see here we've got all of the information that the PBM has provided, so how long the PA is good for, any notes that the PBM wants the doctor to be aware of, and then if it's been approved or denied for something other than the doctor has requested, how long the doctor has to appeal that response. So you can see here it's very seamless. It looks like it's been developed directly within the EMR, and the doctor will have a seamless answering of the PA. So now I'm happy to introduce Neil Simon, who's the COO of Aprima, and Neil will talk a little bit about why he thinks that the complete EPA Accelerator solution is the best solution for Aprima's doctors, and why he thinks the prospective workflow is the best option.
Thanks.
Thanks, Neil.
Well, thanks a lot. I'm Neil Simon, COO of Aprima. When we first looked at starting to do EPA, it looked like a big challenging thing. We went and we talked to our various customers and said, hey, what do you think about this? And we were really surprised that many of our physicians didn't even realize how much time their office staff was spending on EPA because it never got to them. There's always staff members doing it and just getting that fax from the pharmacy. And when they started looking at how much was involved, some of them were saying, I don't even want to write one EPA med ever again if you could help it, because it was just so much time and effort. And it made it look bad for the patient, because the physician told the patient, here, go to the pharmacy, pick up the script. And when they got to the pharmacy, they're like, nope, you can't have the script. And so there was a lot of pain points in that process. And so we looked at, what could we do to help enhance that process and make it better. And we asked our customers, would you like it? And we have a big user summit in August, and they were all excited. When we had about 500 people in the audience, they were all real excited, like, wow, when can I have this now? They wanted it yesterday. And of course, it took some time to develop. And so we looked at what it would take, and with all the other things that we had to deal with, meaningful use and other enhancements, it was really just difficult to build it ourselves. And when we talked with Surescripts and they had the ability to make it happen a lot quicker and easier, we're like really excited. I was like, wow, this is the way to go. Instead of us having to, they're the experts on all these transactions. They understand it in much more detail than we do. And so if we could leverage that, that would make it better for us. It could get delivered better to our customers in a quicker turnaround time. And so we were real excited. So we started investigating what it would take, and we decided to kind of go with the web service API, so we had some control over how it worked within our product, but also provided the ability to not have to write every single screen, that we could leverage a lot of the user interface that was there. Because one of the big things to the physicians was, how do we make sure we have the right form, the latest form, and only answer the right questions? I was surprised a number of times where they had the wrong form, and that just delayed the process even further. And so we really, but we wanted it tightly integrated into our product, so that way when the physician was choosing to prescribe that medication, they would know right then whether EPA was required or not, and they could make a decision. Oh, maybe I want a different medication for this particular patient because they don't want to have to do EPA. Or maybe this is the right med and I'm willing to do the extra work to do the EPA. So having that information right available at the time of e-prescribing was really helpful. Part of the reason we chose Surescripts is we partner with them on the formulary and eligibility aspects of e-prescribing, and so this feeds right into that because right from the formulary they can give us a hint whether EPA might or might not be required for that particular med. And of course physicians, with so many different insurance carriers out there, they don't know which payer and which med requires EPA and which one doesn't, because it can vary based on the individual payers and providers. So we started the integration process. We worked with them to see how we could put it into our user interface and make sure that it was effective for our physicians. We showed it to our doctors that liked it and got feedback whether it was good, and they all were real excited about it. I know they can't wait to have it in their hands. We're going to be rolling it out here shortly, and so they're real excited about how it works. And I think Surescripts being a partner of Aprima was a key benefit, because not only we had other people wanting us to use their EPA solution, but they're not providing us the formulary and the eligibility, so it'd be kind of this extra solution on the side, and we really want it to fit in the workflow. It's really important for Aprima when we look at how we give all these functions to our providers that it fits in the workflow. We don't want them going to various places to have to do it. We want it to be consistent and really fit in their workflow, and so we did that, and then we have it so that the physician sees it, or they can delegate it to their staff right there on their desktops. As soon as they log into Aprima every day, they can see where their EPAs are, which ones have been completed, which ones need to get done. We're excited about the fact that some of the questions get answered, and it helps guide them for which questions are important. I think that's a big key aspect of this that's really helpful, because the physician hates wasting their time answering questions that really weren't helpful getting into it. And it prevents that patient from seeing that surprise. They'll know, oh, I can't go to the pharmacy today. I can go, it'll be 3 or 4 days, or maybe, we hope some of them will be in just minutes. They'll get that EPA done, and the patient can pick up the script like any other, or some might take longer, and they'll know, well, I'll come back in a couple days and I'll be able to get my medication. Or it allows that physician to maybe give them a temporary medication for a short duration until the EPA is processed, and then they'll get the regular med that physician wants to prescribe for that patient in the end. Some of the things that as Aprima we hope to see as this rolls out, we hope that it's going to make our physicians' lives easier, and so therefore more physicians will want to say, hey, Aprima is the great EHR solution that we want to work with because this stuff is built in. It saves me time and saves me money. Physicians are always skeptical on ROI type sales and ROI type decisions, and I think this is the case where they'll be able to see it and show, wow, this really has made our life easier. Hopefully more and more payers will be on it and be quicker, so that we really can get to eventually being a real-time process where right away 90% of those EPA decisions can be done before that patient leaves the office. So that way when that patient goes to the pharmacy or after they've come to the doctor, they can get the right medication and treat their problem as quickly as possible, because that's the real end goal, right? Is that the physician, whatever their problem happens to be, it gets treated as effectively as possible and as quickly as possible. And right now this is part of the system that hasn't been. I think one of the things most of our physicians were surprised by, they weren't asking for this because they didn't even think this could be automated. They were actually shocked that this is something that they could do or that could be automated, because they felt it was such a cumbersome and complicated process. And so when they found out, wow, this really works and can be done, they were excited and like, wow, this is something that really will save me time. Maybe unlike some of the other things that claim to save me time, this really will do it, and I think they're very excited about it. So we're excited about our partnership with Surescripts, and we're excited to roll this out to our customers, and we'll be busy rolling this out to them starting in April throughout the rest of the year. So. Thanks.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions? Nope. Sure.
A couple of big EHRs up there that have a concern. What's your roadmap for future integrations?
For future integrations, we're always looking to add new EHRs onto the network, and we should have a couple of announcements coming out over the next couple of months, but it's not something I can talk about. Yes? So reporting that goes back to Aprima on the drugs that are required prior authorization.
Yeah, so right now the way it works is from the formulary process, there's a flag in there that says which ones are require EPA. And so in Aprima, as soon as the doctor writes that script, we light up a little icon that says EPA required, and we send the EPA when they send that script right away at the same time. There's others where maybe you're not sure it's required, so the doctor can always click the box to send it if they think this one might be required for that particular one. And that's where I'm hoping that that'll get better and better over time, that box will just check itself and doctors won't even think about it. They'll just prescribe the med and boom, we warn them right when they prescribe the med that the EPA is required so they can decide if they want to choose a different med or continue on the EPA process.
Anything else? All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.